Hey, creative souls, writers, word witches, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy that you tuned in. My name is Johnny. I'm a published fiction writer and a retired adjunct writing professor. For 2 decades, I helped college students get their words on the page. Now I teach fiction writing and screenwriting to adults in custody, and I help people write novels. I call myself a word witch, and if you want to know more about what I mean by that, check out my video called On Being a Word Witch. I believe I'm on this earth to heal the world through stories, whether it's the ones that I write and tell or the ones that I help you write and tell. I'm new here on YouTube, and I fully embrace the notion of energetic reciprocity, so anything you can do to help me grow my channel would be so appreciated. Your likes, shares, and subscribes truly do help. So right now, at the recording of this video, I'm at 80 followers, okay? That's how new I am. My goal is, by the end of April, I would love to have 100. That is my next goal for this channel. So if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And if you already are, please share it with somebody that you think might benefit from it. And I would really appreciate your help in growing this channel, because obviously the more I grow it, the more I can do in my quest to heal the world through stories. Because as I always say, stories can heal the world, so let's do it together. All right, before I get to the topic of today's video, which is point of view, I want to talk briefly about my new membership group and tell you what it's all about. So for a period of time, I'm offering a special price to founding members. And with that, what you currently get is 1 or 2 virtual writing circles a week. And so for one, it's $18 a month for 1 time per week. And for 2 times a week, it's $28 a month. And you also get a live Q&A at the end of the month with me. So you can ask me any and all questions about writing, about your particular project, whatever you like, I'm happy to help. As I grow this membership group, I will be adding more and more content to it. So the cool thing is, as a founding member, you get to keep the current price for the life of your membership. And this means any and all content that I add to it as time goes on. Okay, so I hope you will join. I did this because I know a number of people who are writers, who are introverts, HSPs, intuitives, neurodivergents, and we all want and need community, but we also want to be left the hell alone, right? I think those of us who are wired in particular ways, I think you will know exactly what I'm talking about. And so writing is a solitary act, but we do need community. We need to know other writers who are going into their caves to write, who have all the fears and questions about what they're working on. And it's just nice to know that there is someone else there who understands, whether we discuss it or not. So I would love it if you would join. I will put info about that at the end of this video and also in the description. All right, so I want to talk about point of view. And before we get into the specifics of point of view, I want to give you a metaphor to consider. And I tried to make a really cool graphic to put up here on the screen, and everything I made just looked like a 5-year-old made it. So I'm just going to explain it to you and use my hands, and you all have good imaginations. You'll be able to see what I mean. Imagine a park, and I send 4 people out to this park to describe to me what they see. I want to know what this park is about, but I don't want to go visit it myself. One of you goes to this corner of the park, and you see a beautiful fountain, and you think, oh, what a lovely park this is. One of you goes to this corner, and you see a bunch of kids on a playground, and you hear their laughter, and you think, oh, what a lovely place this is to just sit, soak up the sun, read a book. One of you goes to this corner, and you see a big pile of trash that's been there for a long time, and you see all kinds of unsavory things in it, and you think, oh, I don't want to come back to this park. This is not a good place to be. The 4th one of you goes to this corner, and you see a fight break out. People are on the ground wrestling, punches are being thrown, and you just think, wow, this is not the kind of energy I want to be around. I don't want to come back to this place. So each one of you is going to have a very specific and limited view of what that park is about. I, on the other hand, am going to have a better idea of what the park is about. All right, so I used to use this analogy when I taught argumentation to college students, because to make a valid argument, we have to look at all sides of the topic or the park, right? If we're going to really make a solid argument based on our own strong opinion. Well, the same is true for writing fiction. So you probably already know, but I will review or go over this for people who don't know. We have 3 options for point of view: first person, second person, and third person. So first person is I. These are stories that are written from the I point of view. I woke up that morning and knew my life would never be the same. All right, if that's the first line of a story, then the rest of that story is going to unfold with I statements, because I'm going to be telling it from the character's first person point of view. So we're going to see it from their point of view. Second person is you, when you speak directly to the reader, right? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. This one usually is not recommended, and I'll explain why. It can be very effective if done really well. Third person is also what we call omniscient. So it's he, she, they. And we have, with omniscient third person, we have full omniscient, and then we also have limited omniscient. And I'll explain in a minute what those are. So here's why it's important to understand point of view. I think understanding point of view, understanding what it does, can help us understand why we really need to give it some thought. Because what I have found is people tend to just write in the point of view that comes out, and they call it a done deal. And what I always recommend is write your first draft in whatever point of view comes out, and then reconsider when you revise. Would this be better told in first person if you've written it in third? Or would it be better told in third person if you've written it in first? And notice how I've skipped over second, because it's its own kind of animal that we'll talk about in a minute. So point of view creates this lens through which the story is told. Is it told only through the protagonist's point of view, I? Is it told through an invisible narrator's point of view? Or is it told through a narrator, third person, who's part of the story? Because that can happen too, okay? So again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Point of view also creates suspense in a story. We can also sometimes, if we do it well, use different points of view in a story. So for example, I could tell a story in first person point of view, and then I could alternate every other chapter with third person point of view, which could be, and this can come off as cheesy, so I'm just using this as an example, but it's used effectively. I've seen it used in films quite a bit. First person point of view, I am the protagonist. I'm using I, as I tell this story, and you get to know me, the character. Second chapter might be third person. That is kind of a meanwhile, while so-and-so protagonist is doing that thing that you saw in chapter 1, this is what else is going on behind the scenes that they don't know anything about. If you manage to do that well, it can be really effective. So you can mix and match points of view. In doing it that way, and with omniscience, we can also create a different kind of suspense in that we can depict for the reader what's going on in everybody's minds if we use full third person, full omniscient, and that can signal the reader about different tensions that are existing that the protagonist might not know anything about. So this can cause that tension, that pull that we want readers to feel so that they will keep turning the page to see what happens next. And then each point of view provides you, the writer, with certain advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so I'll break those down. All right, so first person point of view, as you might guess, it creates this intimacy. You can get inside the skin, the heart, mind, soul of a protagonist. And this can be a really good thing for drawing a reader in and making them really care about your protagonist. But the downside to first person is that it's very limited. We are all limited in our view of the world because it's based on our own personal experiences. And so we need to weigh that. If we're choosing to use first person point of view, we need to think, is using first person going to limit my story in a way that I don't want it to? Am I not going to be able to share certain things with the reader because I'm only writing from this character's very limited point of view? So for me, I will say, for my novel, Miranda's Garden, this was a consideration for me. And I knew I had to write with limited third person. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. I chose that instead of first person because in the beginning of the story, Miranda is not all that connected to all parts of herself. She has some blind spots. And so I thought there's no way I could tell this story the way I wanted to from her particular point of view. So I used omniscient third person, limited focus mostly on her. All right, some examples of first-person narratives or first-person points of view in famous novels. Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. The I is Holden Caulfield. He's also the narrator, first-person narrator, first-person protagonist. Okay, Holden Caulfield is a very self-absorbed persona. And so that's the point of view from which this story is told. Another one is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Jean Finch, also known as Scout, is the first-person narrator protagonist in that story. The Great Gatsby, this is an interesting one. It's also first-person, but the first person who is speaking as the narrator is not Jay Gatsby. It's the character Nick. And so we're getting a first-person account from Nick about Jay Gatsby. And then in The Color Purple, Celie is the first-person narrator protagonist, and we get her voice through letters that she writes. And so that's how we hear her voice as a first-person narrator. All right, let's talk about second person now. Second person can be really effective. It can also be really problematic, and so that's why it's oftentimes recommended that you don't use second person. One of the best-known novels is Bright Lights, Big City by Jay McInerney. Another is by Italo Calvino, and it is On a Winter's Night, a Traveler. And as I remember, I've not read this, I will say I've not read this full novel. I've read excerpts. As I remember it, and it's been a long time, so correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. As I remember, it's in second person, but it's from two different points of view, two different characters' points of view. So the first you is the writer speaking to the reader. All right, the second you is the male protagonist or the male narrator in it. All right, so it may sound confusing, but in this case, second person is used, but it changes, okay? Another one is, and this is not a novel, but it's a collection of short stories written in second person by Lori Moore called Self-Help. There are 9 stories in this collection. 6 of them are written in second person. So one is How to Become a Writer. I think another one is How to Be the Other Woman. And so these full stories are written in second person only. All right, so the benefit of second person is you like almost immediately go bam, straight into the reader. You're saying you. You're talking directly to them. Disadvantage to this is it can start to feel too much for the reader. It can feel aggressive. It can feel bossy. And at times you are telling the reader what they think and what they do. And some people can be resistant to this. Those of us who have authority issues, we don't like being told what we think and feel. And we might shut down and we might not want to read. So it can be effective. It can also be a risk using second person. So you might want to check out some of those I mentioned, even if you don't want to read the entire books. Check them out and just see how this is done and how it flows. Okay, third person. As I said, full omniscient, limited omniscient. Here are the advantages. You're able to provide more insight. So this is all-seeing, all-knowing. Full omniscience is oftentimes called like a godlike view of the story and the characters. So when you use full omniscience, you can get inside of the heads of each character and explain their thought processes and behaviors to the reader. So this can be really helpful. And of course, you don't always want to do this with every character. It's just if it's to the benefit of telling the story that you want to do this. It can also create some emotional distance because we're not living inside that character. We're hearing about the character filtered through the author and the narrator. But there are ways to make up for that, right? We can get into the feelings of the character and not necessarily always saying, so-and-so felt this way. We can show it. We can show the angst inside them. We can show the fear inside them. We can show the sadness. So we can still find ways to allow the protagonist or other characters to show up for the reader in a way that feels intimate and emotional and human. When using third person as the writer, you're able to kind of float above the plot and explain and interpret things that you can't do in first person. And in doing this, you also allow the reader to do the same thing. A benefit to third person also is that readers generally accept third person without question because it feels more objective. It comes across as more objective. Whereas first person, if you intentionally create a first person unreliable character, then the reader's kind of like, I don't know what to think. And if you're doing this intentionally, that's what you want the reader to think. But by using third person, you establish a kind of trust. It's just sort of a given trust that the reader is going to accept what you're laying out in this story without question. All right, so let's look at some full omniscient examples. Beloved by Toni Morrison, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and The Hours by Michael Cunningham. It's about 3 women, and we bounce around in time periods. One of the women is Virginia Woolf. We get this very personal account from each of these 3 women in different periods of time and what's going on in their lives. Fabulous story. It's so well executed. I highly recommend that book and the film. I'd say read the book first, then watch the film. Okay, so now let's look at some limited omniscient examples. 1984 by George Orwell. This is third person, but it's very specific to the experience of Winston Smith. A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. This is also another one that's third person, but from the lived experience of Meg Murray. And then there's Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and the character in that who gets this very special third person but limited point of view is Guy Montag. And then there are others that use different points of view. And I'm sure there are more than this, but one that came to mind for me is by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and it's Autumn of the Patriarch. And so this uses all 3 points of view, first, second, and third. So you might want to also check that one out to see how he does that. So I want to return to the park analogy for a minute. So remember what I said in the beginning about this park and all these different points of view. All right, so things to consider when we're deciding on point of view. Like I said, first draft, write whatever point of view naturally shows up. It might be the one that you need to use. But at least after that first draft, stop and ask yourself, could this be better told in another point of view? So we need to think about who is the story for, because that will inform then who needs to tell them that story. So asking ourselves these questions can help inform the point of view that we choose for our story. Ask yourself that after your first draft, who is the story for and who should tell it to them? How can I best portray this story for these people? And if it's a general audience, then it's a general audience. All right, so I hope that helps. I love talking about point of view. I think it's fascinating, and the way that we use it can really change the way a story comes across and the way that we write it. So give it some thought, and maybe on your revisions, try different points of view and just see how the story lands differently. All right, don't forget about the membership group. I would love to have you in as a fellow writer when we get online and write together. And then also to see you in the Q&A each month. And also please help me get to 100 by the end of April, because then I'm going to celebrate, and I'll tell you what I do when I get there. As always, I send you mad writing mojo. Happy writing.